Lina trusted her sister Tara, but Tara betrayed her in the darkest way, drugging her and sending her straight into the bed of the ruthless billionaire Alexander Royce, a man whose wealth and power would change Lina's life forever and leave her carrying his twins in a world where nothing is as it seems. The night began like any other in Lina's quiet life, filled with ordinary routines and small comforts. She never imagined that a single evening would change everything she thought she knew about her sister, her family, and even herself. Lina had always admired Tara's confidence, her charm, and her ability to move through life with seemingly effortless control. She had looked up to her, trusted her, and often relied on her guidance. But trust, as Lina would soon discover, could be the most dangerous vulnerability of all. Tara had convinced Lina to attend an exclusive party, promising an opportunity to meet influential people who could open doors for her future. The party was at one of the city's most luxurious mansions, a place Lina had only seen in magazines. Tara spoke of the wealthy guests, the glittering rooms, and the possibility of a life that Lina had never dared to dream of. Her excitement mingled with a small hesitation, a nagging doubt that she quickly pushed aside. She wanted to believe her sister's intentions were kind, that this evening would be nothing more than a harmless adventure. As they arrived, the mansion's grandeur was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, reflecting light across ornate walls adorned with priceless artwork. Servants moved silently through the rooms, attending to guests who appeared unbothered by the luxury surrounding them. Lina felt a mixture of awe and intimidation. She tried to keep pace with Tara, who led the way confidently, smiling at acquaintances and introducing Lina as if she were already part of their elite circle. Tara offered Lina a drink, one that seemed perfectly ordinary, sparkling and sweet. Lina, trusting her sister completely, accepted it without a second thought. Within moments, the room began to spin. Laughter of the guests became distant and distorted, and a heavy drowsiness pulled at her limbs. She tried to speak, to tell Tara something was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. Her vision blurred, her surroundings melted into a haze, and the last thing she saw before collapsing was her sister's calm, unreadable expression. When Lina awoke, she was no longer in the safety of her familiar world. She found herself in an unfamiliar room, surrounded by opulence she had only glimpsed in dreams. The bed was enormous, the sheets silky, and the walls decorated with expensive paintings. A sense of fear gripped her chest as fragments of the previous night began to emerge. She struggled to piece together what had happened, but the details were hazy, like a half-remembered nightmare. Her heart raced as the realization began to settle in. She had been rendered powerless, her trust exploited, and her body left vulnerable in ways she could not yet understand. As she lay there, trying to comprehend the betrayal, Lina also noticed a subtle feeling she hadn't anticipated. There was an unexpected sense of being watched, a quiet intensity that filled the room. She felt both fear and curiosity, a dangerous combination that made her pulse quicken. Somewhere in the background she sensed Tara's influence lingering, guiding her into this strange new world with careful, calculated precision. The night that was meant to be an adventure had turned into a carefully orchestrated trap, one that would set in motion a series of events that would forever alter Lina's life. The realization hit her like a cold wave. Everything she had taken for granted, her safety, her autonomy, her trust in her sister, had been stripped away in a single, calculated act. And as fear mingled with confusion, Lina had no choice but to confront the truth of the night. She had been manipulated, drugged, and sent into a world far beyond her understanding, a world where power, wealth, and danger intertwined in ways she had never imagined. The first thing Lina noticed when she regained some clarity was the overwhelming silence of the mansion. The grand halls, with their marble floors and towering columns, seemed almost alive, echoing faintly with the memory of voices from the previous night. Shadows stretched across the walls, dancing with the flicker of candlelight and the reflections from the ornate mirrors. Lina tried to sit up, but her body protested, heavy and unsteady from the sedative that still lingered in her system. Her mind spun with fragments of memory, incomplete and frighteningly vague, and she realized she had no idea how she had arrived in this place or what her sister had planned. Before she could fully gather her thoughts, a presence entered the room. Alexander Royce stood there, commanding attention without even trying. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and carried an air of authority that made the room seem smaller, as if he alone controlled the space. Lina's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and confusion. She had seen his face in the news, in magazines, in articles about the world's most powerful men, but seeing him here, in person, was entirely different. He exuded a calm, almost predatory awareness, like a man who knew exactly how to manipulate every situation to his advantage. Alexander's gaze lingered on her, assessing, calculating, and Lina felt exposed in a way she had never felt before. The opulence around her suddenly felt suffocating rather than inviting. Every detail, the extravagant furniture, the priceless artwork, the rare antiques, seemed designed not for comfort but as a subtle reminder of the power he wielded. Lina realized with growing horror that she was completely at his mercy. There was no one to turn to, no escape, and no immediate way to understand the depths of the trap she had fallen into. Tara's role became clearer as Lina's mind struggled to piece together the events of the night. The jealousy, the calculated manipulation, the seemingly innocent invitation, it was all part of a plan she had never suspected. Tara had orchestrated everything, ensuring that Lina would be isolated, dependent, and at the mercy of someone far more powerful than either of them had ever imagined. Lina's trust in her sister, once unwavering, now felt like a cruel joke. Every smile, every word of encouragement, every friendly gesture was revealed as a layer of deception. As the hours passed, Lina observed Alexander more closely. His demeanor was controlled, almost cold, yet occasionally softened by gestures that seemed intentionally misleading, designed to disarm her fear. He spoke politely, but each word carried subtle implications of dominance, making her aware that this was not a casual encounter, but a carefully orchestrated introduction to a world where wealth and power dictated the rules. Lina realized that her life was no longer her own. She was caught in a web of manipulation, and every choice she made, every movement she attempted, could be anticipated and influenced. Fear mingled with confusion, and Lina struggled to find a foothold in this alien environment. She thought of her family, of friends who would never understand the trap she had walked into, and of her sister, whose betrayal cut deeper than any physical threat. The reality of her situation began to sink in fully. She had been brought into the heart of opulence, not by chance, but by design. Alexander's mansion was more than a home. It was a carefully controlled arena where Lina was both a guest and a prisoner, and she had no clear way to regain her freedom. Every instinct screamed at her to escape, yet every glance at Alexander reminded her of the impossible odds. The billionaire's influence was everywhere, and Lina felt the first heavy weight of helplessness pressing down on her. She realized that the night had only just begun, and that the journey ahead would demand courage, strategy, and resilience she had never needed before. Trapped between fear and awe, she understood one undeniable truth: her life had been forever altered, and there was no turning back. Lina woke slowly, her eyes adjusting to the soft glow of sunlight streaming through massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The room was unlike anything she had ever seen before. Velvet curtains framed the windows, casting warm shadows across the polished wooden floors. A delicate scent of flowers and expensive perfumes lingered in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of coffee that had been left beside her on a golden tray. At first, she felt as though she had tapped into a dream, a beautiful, surreal escape from her ordinary life. But the unease in her chest reminded her otherwise. This was no ordinary dream, and the memory of the previous night pressed heavily against her mind. She tried to sit up, but her body still felt stiff and unbalanced, a lingering effect of the drugs that had clouded her mind hours ago. Panic began to rise as she realized that she was alone, yet not truly alone. The mansion, with its endless hallways and opulent rooms, seemed to watch her. Every ornate painting, every glimmering chandelier, every carefully placed object felt like it had been positioned with intention, designed to impress, intimidate, and subtly control. Lina could sense the invisible weight of Alexander's presence, even when he was not in the room. The mansion itself seemed alive, a reflection of the man who ruled it with absolute precision. As she explored the suite, Lina noticed gifts arranged meticulously on a nearby table, jewelry, designer clothes, and handwritten notes of polite encouragement. Alexander had gone to great lengths to create an environment that was both luxurious and disorienting. The more Lina took in, the more she realized how carefully her surroundings were designed to manipulate her emotions. There was a strange contradiction at work. She was both spoiled and trapped, admired and monitored. Every luxury was a reminder of her vulnerability, every gesture of kindness a subtle form of control. Her thoughts inevitably turned to Tara. The betrayal was clearer now than ever before. Lina had trusted her sister completely, believing her to be a guide, a protector. Instead, Tara had been the architect of this trap, her jealousy and ambition shaping every decision that led Lina here. The thought cut deeper than fear ever could. Lina felt a wave of anger mixed with despair. She was beginning to understand the scale of the manipulation. Tara's involvement, Alexander's calculated charm, and the intoxicating luxury that masked the danger, all of it had been orchestrated with chilling precision. Despite the fear, a strange curiosity took hold. Lina began to observe Alexander, trying to understand him, to see the man behind the public image of power and ruthlessness. She realized that he was clever, methodical, and aware of every detail of his environment. His calm demeanor, the way he anticipated her reactions, and the subtle power he wielded over those around him, revealed a mind that was both brilliant and dangerous. Lina's fascination was tinged with dread. She was caught in a delicate balance of fear, intrigue, and unwanted attraction to the life he offered. As the day progressed, Lina's initial confusion slowly gave way to a cautious awareness. She understood that she could not rely on anyone, least of all her sister. She would have to navigate this world with intelligence, patience, and caution. Every decision mattered, every move had consequences, and every luxury she was offered could be a tool of manipulation. For the first time, Lina realized that her survival depended on understanding the forces around her and learning to maneuver within them without exposing her vulnerability. By evening, Lina felt a mixture of awe and unease, wrapped in the golden cage Alexander had created. She knew that the life she had stumbled into was seductive, dangerous, and far more complex than she had imagined. This was a world of wealth and power, yes, but also a world of manipulation and control, where trust was a rare commodity, and every smile could hide a hidden agenda. Lina understood that the real challenge was just beginning. She had entered a world that could either consume her entirely, or, if she learned quickly, provide a path to survival and strength. The news came slowly, like a shadow creeping across Lina's carefully controlled world. At first, she felt only confusion, a fog of disbelief that refused to lift. The tests, the signs her body had been hinting at, all pointed to one undeniable truth. She was pregnant, not with just one life growing inside her, but with twins. The revelation shook her to her core, leaving her breathless and dizzy. For days she oscillated between shock, fear, and an unexplainable sense of awe. Two lives, entirely dependent on her, had begun without her consent in circumstances she could barely comprehend. Tara's presence, once distant and seemingly benign, became a constant, oppressive reminder of betrayal. Lina began to see her sister's expressions in a new light, small smiles that didn't reach her eyes, subtle instructions designed to control, and the unspoken satisfaction whenever Lina appeared uncertain or vulnerable. Every interaction carried a hidden layer of strategy, and Lina realized she had been nothing more than a pawn in a larger, intricate game. The realization filled her with anger and sorrow simultaneously, as the person she had trusted the most was also the person most responsible for her current plight. Despite the fear, Lina found herself navigating the mansion with growing awareness. She began noticing patterns, the way staff and assistants responded to Alexander's moods, the quiet rules that dictated the household, and the subtle manipulations designed to isolate her emotionally. Luxury, she realized, was never accidental here. Every silk sheet, every gourmet meal, every compliment was a tool to keep her disoriented, dependent, and compliant. Yet, amidst this realization, there was a part of her that also marveled at the beauty and opulence surrounding her. She was caught in a strange paradox, torn between fear and fascination, between revulsion and desire for the comfort she could not have imagined before. As the days passed, Lina's focus shifted inward. Her pregnancy forced her to confront questions she had never considered. What kind of life could she offer these children, born into a world of wealth and deception? Could she protect them from the forces that had ensnared her? The fear of losing herself, or worse, losing her children to the manipulations of Alexander and Tara, pushed her to a newfound resolve. She understood that survival required not only patience but strategy, an awareness of the delicate balance between compliance and resistance. Amidst all this, Lina began to reflect on her own strength, her resilience, and the instincts that had carried her this far. She recognized that her circumstances, as perilous and morally complex as they were, had also revealed a part of herself she had never fully known. She had the capacity to endure, to observe, and to adapt, even under the most oppressive conditions. The realization brought a small, tentative sense of empowerment, yet the stakes were clear. Every action she took, every word she allowed herself to speak, could influence the trajectory of her life and the lives of her unborn children. She could not afford mistakes, not in this gilded cage where luxury was entwined with control. Lina understood that the journey ahead was one of constant vigilance. Her pregnancy, once a private miracle, had become a focal point in a dangerous game where every detail mattered. And as she looked down at the first fluttering signs of life within her, she knew that the choices she made now would determine not just her survival, but the future of two innocent lives born into a world of wealth, power, and deceit. Lina had begun to settle into the rhythms of the mansion, but a growing unease gnawed at the edges of her consciousness. Every gesture, every word, every carefully timed smile from Tara now felt like a test, a calculated move in a game Lina had only just begun to understand. The more she observed her sister, the more inconsistencies she noticed. Tara's concern seemed too precise, too measured. She asked questions that went beyond simple curiosity, her attention lingering on Lina's habits, her routines, and even her interactions with Alexander. The realization hit Lina like a cold wave. Her sister had never been a guide or protector. She had been a manipulator, plotting each step of this elaborate scheme. Lina began her investigation quietly, careful not to alert Tara or Alexander. She listened to whispered conversations, observed secretive phone calls, and noted the patterns of behavior that had once seemed trivial. Every night, as she lay awake in the massive bed surrounded by opulence, she pieced together fragments of information. Small clues, an unexplained phone call, a brief smile shared with Alexander, the way Tara subtly steered conversations, revealed the depth of the betrayal. Lina's trust, once unwavering, had been exploited, and the truth of her sister's motives was far more sinister than she had imagined. It became clear that Tara had been orchestrating everything from the start. She had seen Lina's charm, her innocence, and her vulnerability as tools to gain access to Alexander's world. Every invitation, every seemingly helpful suggestion had been a calculated move to isolate Lina and make her dependent. Tara's ambition had overridden any familial loyalty, and she had partnered with Alexander, knowingly or unknowingly, to ensure Lina's submission. The depth of her sister's deception left Lina shaken. The betrayal was not just personal, it was systemic, designed to control and manipulate her life entirely. Lina realized she had been living in a world of illusions. Alexander's charm, the luxurious gifts, the lavish surroundings, they were all part of a strategy to ensure compliance, to make Lina comfortable, while subtly stripping away her autonomy. Tara had been the architect, the facilitator, the invisible hand guiding Lina into this gilded cage. Each revelation fueled Lina's anger, but also her resolve. She could not undo the past, but she could prepare for the future. She had to understand the full scope of Tara's manipulation full making any move. The mansion, once a place of dazzling beauty, now felt like a labyrinth of surveillance and strategy. Every room, every staff member, every routine was part of a carefully controlled ecosystem. Lina learned to observe without revealing her awareness, to question without alerting, and to act without exposing her suspicions. The betrayal had forced her to sharpen instincts she had never relied upon before, and she began to recognize the subtle power she could wield through intelligence and patience. Yet, even amidst the revelations, Lina struggled with the complexity of her emotions. Anger battled with lingering avolition, fear with cautious curiosity, and despair with the fragile hope of reclaiming control. She understood that navigating this world would require more than strength. It would demand strategy, foresight, and careful calculation. Every move Tara made, every subtle manipulation, became a lesson in vigilance. Lina was no longer just a victim. She was a survivor in training, learning to see the invisible threads of deceit and to prepare for the moment when she could reclaim her life. By the end of her quiet investigation, Lina knew the truth. Her sister had betrayed her. Alexander had exploited her, and her life had been manipulated from the shadows. But she also recognized the power within herself, the intelligence and awareness that could turn this labyrinth into a path toward freedom. The betrayal was complete, but so was Lina's awakening. She understood that the next steps would be crucial, and that survival, and perhaps even justice, depended on her ability to act with patience, courage, and cunning in the face of overwhelming odds. Life in the mansion, once dazzling and intoxicating, began to reveal its darker contours. Lina had learned to navigate the polished floors, the glittering chandeliers, and the endless luxuries, but she now realized that wealth alone did not equal safety. Alexander's world was not just one of money, it was a carefully constructed ecosystem of control, manipulation, and influence. Every gesture, every interaction, every event within the mansion had rules Lina was only beginning to understand. The opulence that once seemed like a blessing now felt like a cage, one whose bars were invisible but no less binding. Alexander's influence extended far beyond the walls of his home. The more Lina observed, the clearer it became that her pregnancy had intensified Alexander's interest. The twins she carried were no longer simply her own. They had become part of a system where her body, her choices, and her future were intertwined with the desires of a man who could bend circumstances to his will. She began to see the mansion itself as a tool of control. The lavish rooms, the constant attention, the carefully timed gifts, all were designed to disorient her, to keep her reliant on Alexander's approval, and to create a sense of indebtedness that was difficult to resist. Even beyond the walls of the mansion, Lina sensed the reach of Alexander's power. She learned through subtle observations that his influence touched every aspect of the city. From business deals to legal matters, from media coverage to personal reputations, those who opposed him or challenged his authority faced consequences that were rarely publicized but widely felt. Lina realized that she was not merely living under one man's roof. She was immersed in a network where his decisions could affect countless lives. The stakes of her presence in this world were higher than she had ever imagined, and her awareness sharpened with every passing day. Despite the fear and uncertainty, Lina also felt a growing clarity about her own position. She recognized that understanding the dynamics of control was essential to survival. She began observing Alexander with a mixture of caution and curiosity, noting his routines, his moods, and the subtle patterns that dictated how he interacted with others. Every compliment, every gesture, every moment of attention carried hidden meaning. Lina realized that while she was vulnerable, she was not powerless. If she could read the rules, anticipate the moves, and act with careful intelligence, she could carve out space for herself and her unborn children. Yet the knowledge came at a cost. Lina's sense of isolation deepened as she saw how entangled she had become in Alexander's world. Tara's betrayal weighed heavily on her, a constant reminder that trust was dangerous and that loyalty could be weaponized. Lina began to understand the delicate balance required. She had to accept the benefits of the lifestyle without surrendering herself entirely, to navigate the luxury and danger simultaneously, and to protect the twins who were now at the center of this complex web of power. By the end of this realization, Lina understood that her life had become a high-stakes game. The mansion was not a home, it was an arena. The wealth surrounding her was not safety, it was leverage. And Alexander, with all his charm and influence, was both a threat and a key to survival. Lina knew that every decision, every subtle action, and every moment of observation would matter. To endure, she would need patience, intelligence, and courage, and she would have to learn quickly the rules of a world where wealth and power dictated the fate of those caught within it. The delicate balance Lina had managed to maintain for months began to shift abruptly, shattering the sense of control she had fought to achieve. A scandal erupted in the media, one that threatened to expose Alexander's carefully hidden dealings. Rumors of financial misconduct, secretive alliances, and questionable decisions spread like wildfire, casting shadows over his public image. The news startled Lina, not because she was surprised, but because she immediately understood the opportunity it presented. Alexander, for all his power, was now vulnerable in ways he had never been before, and Lina realized that the same cunning and patience she had relied on to survive could now be used to reclaim some measure of control. Tara, who had long thrived on manipulation and subtle dominance over Lina, was also facing consequences she could no longer escape. Her schemes, once hidden behind smiles and persuasive words, began to unravel. Contacts she had relied on, arrangements she had carefully orchestrated, and her subtle influence over the household started to falter. Lina watched with a mixture of anger and satisfaction as the sister who had betrayed her so completely began to face the fallout of her own ambition. The sense of betrayal that had weighed so heavily on Lina now fueled a growing determination. She understood that the moment had come to act, to assert herself, and to take steps toward reclaiming her life and protecting her unborn children. Lina began to navigate this shifting landscape with precision. She observed Alexander's reactions to the scandal, noting how his confidence wavered in private moments and how his usual control over those around him was strained. She learned which wives remained loyal and which were now hedging their bets, uncertain where the balance of power would ultimately fall. Every encounter, every conversation, every subtle exchange became an opportunity for Lina to gather information, to anticipate the next move, and to plan her own strategy. The mansion, once a gilded cage, became a chessboard on which she could carefully maneuver. As the tension escalated, Lina also found a deeper sense of inner strength. The fear and uncertainty that had dominated her early days began to transform into resolve and clarity. She realized that survival was not just about enduring manipulation or wealth. It was about understanding the system, predicting outcomes, and acting decisively when the moment demanded. With each observation and calculated move, Lina regained a measure of agency she had thought lost forever. The twins, growing steadily within her, became the most urgent motivators. Lina's focus sharpened as she considered not only her own safety but theirs as well. Every decision was weighed carefully: how to protect them, how to distance herself from Tara's influence, and how to navigate Alexander's unpredictable moods. The stakes were higher than ever, and Lina understood that patience and subtlety were essential tools in a situation where overt defiance could trigger consequences too severe to risk. By the end of this turbulent chapter, Lina had begun to reclaim her autonomy in small but meaningful ways. The public scandal had shaken the foundations of Alexander's empire. Tara's manipulations were crumbling, and Lina's awareness and strategy were growing stronger by the day. The gilded cage of luxury and manipulation was still present, but Lina now understood that power was never absolute. Even in a world dominated by wealth and influence, cleverness, courage, and patience could carve paths to freedom. For the first time, Lina saw a future in which she was not merely surviving, but actively shaping the course of her life and the lives of her twins, determined to emerge from the shadows of betrayal and control with strength and clarity. The moment Lina had long anticipated finally arrived. though not without tension and careful planning. Months of observation, calculation, and silent endurance had brought her to a point where she could act with confidence, using knowledge and strategy as her tools. The mansion, once a place of confinement and manipulation, became the stage for her emergence. Lina understood that freedom would not come through confrontation alone. It required intelligence, patience, and a deep understanding of the forces at play. Every move had to be deliberate, every word measured, and every step taken with foresight. Alexander, weakened by public scrutiny and the erosion of his carefully maintained influence, was increasingly distracted. Lina recognized the cracks in his authority and learned to use them subtly to her advantage. She spoke cautiously, asking questions and making observations that allowed her to gather information without drawing suspicion. Meanwhile, Tara's schemes were unraveling at an alarming pace. Her manipulations, once hidden behind smiles and small gestures, were exposed through a combination of investigative insight and the natural consequences of her greed. Lina watched as her sister's power diminished, realizing that the betrayal which had haunted her for so long was finally being repaid in its own way. As the mansion's atmosphere shifted, Lina began to assert control over her own life. She approached Alexander not with open defiance, which could provoke retaliation, but with measured confidence, subtly guiding decisions and setting boundaries. She used her growing understanding of his moods, patterns, and vulnerabilities to negotiate small freedoms that compounded into larger ones. Each success reinforced her courage, and the feeling of being in control, once unimaginable, began to take root. Lina realized that survival was not just endurance, it was the art of influence, the quiet power of intelligence and observation applied strategically. The twins, whose presence had been a source of both fear and determination, became Lina's anchor. Protecting them was no longer an abstract concern. It was her central mission. She began planning for a future where they would be safe, free from the manipulation and control that had defined her own early experience in Alexander's world. Her strategies now extended beyond immediate survival to long-term security, ensuring that the children would inherit a life shaped by her choices rather than by the whims of others. When the opportunity finally presented itself, Lina acted decisively. With evidence of Tara's betrayal and Alexander's vulnerabilities, she approached the situation with calm authority. She exposed the manipulations, documented the betrayals, and ensured that both her sister and Alexander faced the consequences of their actions. The scandal that had once threatened her now became a tool for justice, turning the tables on those who had sought to control her. Lina's intelligence, patience, and courage transformed a situation of extreme vulnerability into one of empowerment. By the end, Lina emerged, not just as a survivor, but as a woman who had reclaimed her life. She secured custody of her twins and established a safe, independent existence, free from the manipulations that had ensnared her for so long. Tara's downfall and Alexander's exposure became cautionary tales, symbols of how ambition, greed, and unchecked power could be challenged. Lina's story, once defined by betrayal and fear, concluded with strength, resilience, and hope. She had entered the world as a pawn, but she left it as a strategist, protector, and survivor, proving that even in a life overshadowed by wealth, power, and deception, courage and intelligence could prevail.